Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conflict and War Studies. I'm Rabia. Today, we're diving into one of the most debated topic of the week, the new US-backed peace plan for the Russia-Ukraine war. To help us navigate this complex picture, we are joined once again by retired Brigadier General Ufuk Uras. General, welcome back.
Thank you, Rabia.
Let's start with the timing. This plan appears at a moment when both sides, I think, are under pressure, militarily, economically, and politically. And I wonder, why is this particular proposal receiving so much attention now? And is this truly a search for peace or more a reflection of political fatigue in Washington and European capitals?
Yes, I think it's time for the peace because the parties have fought more than 3 years now. When we look at the history, the wars usually not go far than 4 years. There are
Hmm.
wars that extend 4 years, but usually it's 3 years, 4 years. And I think the parties are tired of this war because their losses are really high. Both sides have lost more than 1 million soldiers. There are civilian casualties. The infrastructure is damaged. The Ukraine has faced severe destruction in the cities. People have left their homes. For this reason, I think the parties really want peace. The United States President Trump, before he came to power, he mentioned in his electoral campaign that he will end the war. So the Alaska meeting, I think, was an important step. Maybe there was no any solid outcome at this time about a peace proposal, but it seems like that they have discussed main principles of peace. After that, this initiative continued, and the parties negotiated through their officials, and the United States came up with a 28-point peace plan. But the plan was resisted by Europeans and Ukraine. They said this plan is very much aligned with Russian objectives. This was the
Yeah.
main criticism against the plan. And they
Yeah,
hold.
let's unpack what's actually inside this proposal before like thinking about all of the critics, because like the details spark serious debate, as you said. But I wonder, like general, let's give the context to the to our audience more. The original draft had around 28 points, and
Mhm.
some of them were very controversial, like territorial concessions, limits on Ukraine's military, restrictions on NATO pathways, and I don't know, like gradual sanctions relief for Russia. All of the things where EU is basically not supporting. But after heavy criticism, the US and Ukraine basically revised the text down, and they just revised it down to around 18, 20 points article, I guess, with softened language. So I wonder what is in this plan actually, and from a strategic and military perspective, which elements do you find the most problematic or risky for Ukraine's long-term security in general?
Okay, first of all, the new version of the plan hasn't been publicized yet. As you said, it is 18 or 19-point plan now, but we don't know the details. And it was a bit surprised because the position of Europeans and the position of US was very different. The United States believed that without any territorial concessions, it won't be possible to reach a peace with Russia. On the other side, Europeans and Ukraine believe that they should never give up any terrain because they believe that Russia is aggressor. For that reason, they expect that Russia should withdraw from the areas that Russia occupied.
It wasn't the case in the 28 article initial plan.
Yes, according to the 28-point peace plan, Donbas and Crimea are recognized as Russian territory. And Europeans and Ukraine rejected this. I don't know how it is resolved in the new text. Another important point was the NATO membership. US stated in the plan that Ukraine will not become a NATO member. The new text will be negotiated with President Putin next week. The US envoy Witkov will fly to Russia and he will speak with Russian officials.
Let's now turn to Kiev because their stance is central to whether this plan even survives, right? Publicly, Kiev repeats a firm line. They're saying that no territorial concessions and full restoration of the 1991 borders. But at the same time, they're engaging with Washington and most points of this plan, I think, since because they have to do. So, how much room does Ukraine truly have politically and militarily to compromise? And if Kyiv were pressured into accepting less than full territorial integrity, how could that affect Ukraine's internal stability in the upcoming years?
And the key point is the Donbas, I think, because Donbas for Russia is an area which they will never give up.
Yeah.
But they are not full control of Donbas yet. I mean, Russia now maybe controls 75 or 80% of Donbas. And they want Ukraine to give up the 20% part of Donbas, which is under Ukraine control. So, without Donbas, it seems to me that Russia will not sign a peace agreement and they may continue to fight against Ukraine. Ukraine is in a difficult situation because US has cut its support to Ukraine, its military support, and Ukraine does not have enough resources to sustain this war alone. And even if Ukraine is supported by US and Europeans, the human resources is a problem for Ukraine. Every month they're losing for about 20, 25,000 soldiers, and to sustain this is really a big issue for Ukraine. For that reason, unless the Europeans send their own troops to Ukraine to fight against Russia, this war cannot be won. Russia cannot be defeated.
I
Uh,
see.
and if they send their troops to Ukraine, and if their forces fight a war against Russia, this would mean a war between NATO and Russia. So
Yeah,
this
this would
is,
mean the escalation of the situation.
and for this reason, both the US and Europeans do not want a war with Russia directly. NATO member Ukraine would never be acceptable to Russia. So in theory, yes, they're the independent country that they can make their choice to be a NATO country. But the fact on the ground and the geopolitical facts dictate a different position, and the position is neutral state status, I think.
Yes, yes. But I think like after seeing a lot of casualties happening in Ukraine, I think it must be really hard for any like average Ukrainian to accept this fact that like they need to make a peace with Russia. I think the overall situation is like really tense.
Now that brings the issue of the security guarantees for Ukraine. If a peace is agreed, how could they deter further Russian aggression?
Yes.
So this is one of the points in the peace plan. Their armed forces was limited to 600,000 according to the initial text, but I think now they agreed, both sides agreed for 800,000, and this is a large number. I mean, an armed force today with an 800,000 manpower is a big army. It is a big armed force. So it is, I think, understandable and acceptable. I don't think Russia will reject this. The most important point is the NATO Article 5 like um, security guarantee for Ukraine. In case of a Russian aggression, according to this 28-point peace plan, this will be considered as an aggression to US and the European countries. In that case, US and European countries will fight against Russia. I think this is quite strong security guarantee, but this has to be detailed.
Yes.
How would it work? I mean, it is not a NATO guarantee, but it is a guarantee of US and Europeans.
So, General, I'd like to turn to Moscow right now. I wonder how Moscow's reaction to what's happening. So, President Putin said parts of the US backed plan could serve as a basis for talks, but if and only if Ukraine recognizes Russian control over occupied territories, as you said, and they withdraw from certain regions. So, from Russia's perspective, what does the ideal outcome look like? As you said, is it like, let's say, they get the Donbas region? Is it enough for them? Do you see this as a genuine interest in peace or basically a tactical pause to lock in territorial gains?
I think it is very important if Donbas is given to Russia, Russia would very much inclined to agree for the peace agreement. One of the issues is as we have spoken, the security guarantees. According to 28-point peace plan, EU membership is offered to Ukraine. I think Russia may not reject this. It may be acceptable to Russia provided that the Donbas is given to Russia. Another point is about the Russian assets in Europe, frozen Russian assets, 100 billion dollar asset will be used for the reconstruction and rebuilding of infrastructure in Ukraine. Russia may oppose to that.
Mhm.
And the rest of the money will also be used for some other purposes together with Russia and the United States. Another interesting point is in the plan, US seeks cooperation with Russia, uh, joint investments, projects to be carried out together with Russia. And that shows US and Russia might have agreed on the rare earth minerals in the Donbas region.
I see. So maybe it's time to look to global actors that are shaping the process. And of course, maybe we can start with the United States. They initiated all of this process. So how do you interpret the US approach in general?
So US first policy, I think, is to end the war and to concentrate its effort into China.
Mhm.
US wants to focus on China issue because China is considered as the number one threat to US because China is becoming a leader in the world and they fear that China is going to create alternative world order and
Mhm.
with alternative institutions. And this is the biggest concern for the United States. And if they agree with Russia and work together and create a stability in that part of the world, they counter the China's emergence as the leading power.
I see. So Europe, meanwhile, seems divided, right? Especially over using frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine and fund reconstruction, as you said. How do these divisions within the EU impact the credibility of any future settlement?
There are a few countries who um, favor the peace agreement. I mean, the majority of the European countries insist on their position without any concessions. But without any concessions, the peace won't be able to be achieved. So it is a signal maybe that they want this war to continue.
Mhm.
But this is a wrong strategy because whatever they do without additional military forces on the ground in Ukraine, Russia cannot be defeated. So the European division is not a big issue for the future. They can agree on the terms. The financial issue, for example, can be resolved in one way or the other. Russia may agree on this. I mean, if the 100 billion euros assets are sent to Ukraine for redevelopment, reconstruction, Russia may agree on this, provided that Donbas is given to Russia.
I wonder, lastly, about like while we were talking about the global actors, I wonder NATO and other global actors such as China, Gulf states, maybe Turkey, how influential are they in either enabling or blocking a negotiated settlement in region, if they have any influence?
China may not be so much influential for the peace process. They have provided some support to Russia in this war, but they may not welcome a peace because the war led to the close relationship between Russia and China.
Mhm,
So if Russia becomes a partner of the United States, this is something with which China would not be happy.
mhm,
Uh, from Turkey perspective, Turkey has followed a mostly neutral state policy and communicated with both warring parties and played a constructive role in the peace negotiations in the past. And the parties have some degree of trust to Turkey. For that reason, Turkey has some influence on the developments because both the Ukrainian side and the Russian side are talking to Turkey. But now it is the United States who really holds the main power to make this peace. US, despite the decline in their power, still has the capacity to start wars, to prolong wars, and to end wars.
So, even if everyone wants peace, I think the road is still full of obstacles. And I think four issues dominate in general. One of them is territorial control. Second one is the strength of security guarantees. Thirdly, the massive trust deficit. And lastly, political war fatigue on all sides. So, if you had to choose the single biggest blocker today, General, what would it be, do you think?
As I said earlier, the Donbas issue, the territorial concessions is the key, either blocking or leading to the achievement of a peace deal. So in the past, I mean, before the war, there were two Minsk agreements, Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. According to these agreements, the Donbas region should have been given an autonomy in Ukraine. They would be part of Ukraine, but with an autonomous administration. Ukraine and the parties, the European parties to this agreement, has not fulfilled their commitments. And this is maybe one of the reasons which led to the breakout of a war. So today the question is they may offer an autonomy for the Donbas region, but keeping Donbas within Ukraine. But I don't think this would be accepted by Russia. So it is the key issue. I mean, Russia seems to me that would not agree on a peace without Donbas.
I see.
For
So
for
I
this
think,
reason,
yeah,
referring to your question, the key issue is the territorial concessions, and then comes the security guarantees. Other issues can easily be handled, I believe.
yeah. When I see the like future scenarios, I think three main scenarios analysts are discussing. The first one is negotiated settlement. So it's like good enough settlement in this conflict. The scenario two is basically on frozen conflict. So it's like Korea or Transnistria. and the scenario three is the escalation of this conflict. So I was wondering, which one do you think is the likely?
I think the most likely scenario is negotiated settlement because there hasn't been any time that the parties are so close to the achievement of a peace agreement. So they are very close to that.
Mhm.
I think the parties are also tired of the war. The United States really pressures the parties to agree on a peace. So the negotiated settlement seems to me the most likely scenario. But if that doesn't realize, then it may lead to a further escalation. In that case, the parties will again start an intense fight and they will deploy all their resources into the battlefield. Ukraine will be supported by Europeans and maybe also by the United States. And we may see another round of very intense fight. But I don't see the frozen conflict as a scenario because usually the frozen scenarios come after a ceasefire, and Russia does not want to agree on a ceasefire without a peace agreement first. So there are two scenarios, either a negotiated settlement or a further escalation.
I see. Hopefully, it would be the first one, as you guessed. So, thank you, General. These were all of my questions for this episode. Is there anything you'd like to add?
As you have just mentioned, the peace is the best option, and the parties really have suffered losses. Many
Yeah.
civilians lost their lives, soldiers lost their lives, and still many soldiers are dying in the battlefield. Uh, the the parties should be urged to agree on a peace.
Thank you, General, for your insight, and thank you all for joining us. If you'd like to deep dive into this topic, you can just check our previous episodes. Yeah, I see you in the next time on Conflict and War Studies.